Ready? Back online.
We're ready.
Lloyd. Please return to your seats.
Okay.
Thank you, Lloyd. All right. So,
Before
anyone
we
like to start our discussion?
before we start the discussion, I think I just reminded that in this plan that you showed, Lloyd, there's no mention of the high-speed train, maintenance yard. Where would that be, and which area are you talking about?
Again, as we've had multiple discussions, there is no planned high-speed rail yard, so if the commission wants to designate where you think one would belong, that's your prerogative, but we're not proposing a site for a high-speed rail yard. One's not been identified formally by high-speed rail, so we're not going to guess where that would be or its configuration. That's
What do you mean, if they already started the electrification already?
No, I meant, we don't know if they want to come here.
Well,
I know.
from what we heard so far, the preferable site is Brisbane.
Oh.
So we do have to keep this in mind, whatever we do with
Well,
these areas.
actually, as a matter of fact, when I was looking at the section 2, I was imagining that
No, that is,
in the realm of high-speed rail with the with the solar farm over it.
I was thinking it will be more towards the area 4 or 5 that we talked about,
405.
industrial area there, because that makes more logical sense because it's close to the railroad tracks.
405.
So, but something should be mentioned here, whether we have it or not, but provision should be made in this plan.
Are you saying that you think they're going to take over the area that's the roundhouse?
Close to the roundhouse, or maybe either side of it, but and I'm sure that that this will be the area that the Southern Pacific yard makes more sense for them to have it there.
Then I don't want to even think about it.
Well, you don't have to think about right now, but that's a
I mean,
fact.
that's one of the areas that could be cleaned up a little more easily than some of these other areas.
The direction you had given previously in relation to the rail yard or potential for a maintenance yard is that we would acknowledge that the Baylands is one of the sites, if not the favored site for maintenance yard, and that the authority will be doing its own environmental for the rail yard, picking a specific location and defining a specific area for it. Because as you just saw, the first problem we run into is we know it will be along the rail, but you just heard arguments. It's logical on the east side of the rail, it's logical on the west side of the rail, and the authority has not made that decision. So that's why we would suggest recognizing the potential for that yard, and we would actually designate the site for the uses you think appropriate in the absence of a yard, and then it becomes the authority's responsibility to define how much they want, where they want it, and then to acquire it.
But my concern was that it's going to affect the intensity, wherever you're going to put it, because then it's going to change that particular area. So
And
it will be subject to.
Right, and realistically, and this is why we'd have that discussion at the general plan level, ultimately, if the authority would decide to acquire, whether it's, I can't remember the parameters, but somewhere between 40 and 100 acres, whatever they end up with, that would take land out of development. And
Right.
the question that the community would face is, if 40 acres is purchased by the authority, if 100 acres is purchased by the authority, what happens to the land use intensity that just got purchased? Does the developer get to transfer that elsewhere, or does essentially the authority purchase not only the land, but the development intensity that would have occurred. So if that 40 to 100 acres would otherwise be shown for, and I'm just picking numbers at random, 1 million square feet of building, then the authority, then the build-out reduces by 1 million square feet when they buy it.
Yeah, that will be I guess the question that we can ask the attorney in terms of what will be the case. Because the thing is, if we do approve the intensity, then it gives the shorthand to the Caltrain if they want to build the maintenance yard there.
Correct.
So it's at this point it will be very difficult to assign the intensity for that area, the area that I'm thinking about.
My recommendation to you is look at the land use and intensity that makes sense to you if the authority does not purchase any land, and then if the authority does purchase, whether it's west of the rail, east of the rail, whatever area, that simply becomes rail yard and gets taken out of the development, because trying to outguess which side, exactly how much, it's at this point it's guesswork for us. It's guesswork for everybody.
Okay, let's move on.
What I would suggest is on the handout, what you see up on the screen right now are the 10 areas we talked about. There's land use choices with each one. In Area 1, which is the recology area, we've talked about that, or the Commission has talked about that as being basically light industrial, recology, and if what you wanted to do is provide sufficient development intensity for the expansion of recology, and if it occurs, or other uses if it didn't, just over 1 million square feet, we're suggesting 1,050,000 square feet would provide for recology expansion.
Are you saying that they could expand in space in the space they have, without taking additional land?
No, in the way that this is laid out, Area 1 goes down to the
1 point.
to the Geneva extension, and so if recology would stay within its existing footprint, you would have light industrial uses along the north side of Geneva between recology and the Geneva extension. If recology expanded, they would expand down to Geneva, is how we had discussed it with the Commission previously.
Okay.
So if that 1,050,000 square feet makes sense to you, that does provide for the expansion as recology has talked about it. If recology would not expand, they would stay at their current size or could expand within their existing property, and the balance of that square footage up to the 1,050,000 would be available for the other properties down to the Geneva extension.
So that 1 million square foot includes the current size of recology?
Yes.
Which is about what?
The existing size of recology is
586,
it's about 500,000 square feet.
586, 700.
Yeah.
I have a lot to process. I have a lot to think about. I don't know about anybody else.
Yeah, I don't.
I feel rather like I can't really discuss anything at this point because I want to think about it. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I have the same problem. I think these are some big numbers that we have to really.
I mean,
decide.
this is a presentation that we hadn't anticipated in a certain level. I mean, I didn't anticipate it. I think it's fabulous, but I just didn't anticipate it.
Yeah.
I don't know how to discuss something that
So you're feeling like you need more time to
I think
process
I
it?
need to process it and maybe go home and look at the video and look at this and really think about.
Because each of these
Because
options,
each of these, this is very intriguing, but I, at this point, I don't know about anyone else. I feel rather like I need some time.
Okay. Commissioner Anderson, how do you feel about that?
plus I think this goes beyond what the Planning Commission can do, because this has to have a community impact, because a lot of it is really what type of development we're looking for, and
I think
it is the area where I think City Council probably have to be involved in this too, in terms of the density itself. So
I'm not sure about that, but I think that personally, I feel I need to
Yeah.
integrate some of this. I mean, it's very interesting, but to
difficult.
kind of make decisions or analysis of it is not something I can do tonight.
Okay.
What do you think, Greg?
How do you feel?
Well, I still have a pile full of questions.
Good.
I think, yes, and although public commentary is closed, we have
Right.
been typically opening for
Right.
public commentary for a while. But I think I'd like to, well, I don't know, it's up to you.
I'd love to hear your questions. I don't know about anyone.
Do you feel comfortable going through questions now, or do you want to wait till we all process and come back? And staff, do you have suggestions on what we?
We would
And
suggest whatever questions you have, you get them out today, because all again are going to delay the process
Right.
by asking questions.
Yeah.
If people have questions at this point, they might as well get them out on the table so we can respond.
Right.
Well, maybe you pick your top three.
Maybe if you ask some questions, then my brain will start working again.
Okay.
Sure. Why don't we go through some of your top questions?
Okay, these are kind of in a random order. A couple meetings ago, when we had the financial analysis, it was mentioned that cleanup was estimated to be 1.1 billion, but there was also a note in the financial analysis that the development would be easier if the cleanup could be kept to 600 million, and it is still unclear to me what factors exactly account for that. I understand that we have to go through landfill closure regardless of what we build, and that's going to cost a certain amount of money. But, would certain kinds of development be cheaper than others in terms of what we have to do to clean up the area?
Again, I think just to make sure we're clear, that the 1.1 billion number from the developer's sort of cost basis was not just remediation or landfill closure, it was all infrastructure and grading and remediation and landfill closure. So again, can that number be reduced? It would be not just off the remediation or closure technique, it would be off, are there things that could be done with infrastructure? Are there areas that you don't have to have as much infrastructure? I don't believe the developer thinks that sort of that reduction, I don't want to speak for them, but I don't believe they felt that sort of a 45% reduction in that cost might be realistic. But, that's something you can always discuss with the applicant at some future point.
So then the next question is about the soil processing operations. Maybe it was 3 meetings ago, I'm losing track now, or maybe it was also 2 meetings ago in the financial analysis. There, is my mic not on? It's on. So a couple meetings ago, it was mentioned that there was a desire to keep the soil processing plant going as long as possible, and at that time I misunderstood that the reason for that was to make it easy to move the dirt right across this area to the other part of the development where dirt is going to be needed. But then last meeting, my understanding is that was not correct, that it's cheaper to buy new dirt to bring into the west side and then sell off all of the dirt on the east side. So my next question is why, when are we going to start the process, or when is the applicant going to start the process of selling off the dirt, and what does that comment mean about keeping the soils processing going as long as possible? Is that for the applicant's benefit or the city's benefit in terms of tax revenue, or what are the factors there?
Again, there is city truck haul fees that come from that operation. So, I mean, it does have a financial benefit to the city of Brisbane. Obviously, it has a financial benefit to the property owner as they go through this entitlement process. So in terms of who might benefit financially from the ongoing continued operations, I would say that both the city and the developer have, a financial gain potentially with that continued operation.
Yeah, I recognize that. So I was just wondering, though, if that comment about keeping it going as long as possible was that city sourced, or
Who was the one that made that comment? I thought that was our
was it the
economic advisor.
Yeah, I don't know.
Was it?
Yeah.
I thought.
Well, there was in the fiscal impact analysis, certainly there is context that, in terms of what the net fiscal impacts of development are, if there's a gap between the closure of the soil processing and there's some gap between that revenue source being lost to the city before, a development stream associated with development occurs or commences, then there's a loss of revenue to the city in that gap period, from a very linear fashion. And maybe that's the context. I don't have a direct recollection of the discussion, but I know we did have that discussion about the loss of revenue that could occur from the loss of operation.
Okay, so my next question is really the big one. So we have had some level of financial study done, but it was at a very high level, and I think it's still rather difficult to compare, the financial impact of a 1 million square foot development versus 6 million versus 12 million. And the financial analysis said that 1 million wasn't feasible, and a number of people have said that the Krebel plant and solar farm are not financially feasible, but in the past that was said that to have been financially feasible, but we never saw any information about that. So what is the process at this point about getting more financial information on some of these other plans, so there's something other than opinion to back up whether it's feasible or not?
I think there's information in the record that reflects a wide array of opinions about financial feasibility and economic feasibility. And, to the extent that in the record, as a body, with whatever recommendation you're comfortable making, that you're comfortable that there's information that supports the economic feasibility finding, you're just making a recommendation to the city council. You're not in a position where you're making a decision. Certainly the council is going to have the opportunity to review refined studies based perhaps on your recommendation, as opposed to studying, economic analysis can be a fairly time-consuming and expensive sort of endeavor. And so the idea of just testing the feasibility of multiple alternatives, I don't think that's, defer to the attorney, but I don't really believe that's something that you have a obligation to do. You have information on the record, and whatever recommendation you make to the council, we'll make sure the findings reflect, the information and the facts that you based your recommendation upon.
Okay.
But how can you do that when you don't have the comparison for the fiscal analysis for the two alternatives? You need that in order to make a judgment as to what will be your recommendation. And I think that's what Greg is probably trying to get here is if you're going to recommend one versus the other, then we need to analyze all of them, whether it's going to cost less or more. We need that information.
I would suggest another approach if financial feasibility is the only basis upon, you have two alternatives, and one has X and one has Y amount of development, and you're saying from your recommendation that from a land use standpoint, the only basis upon which you would be able to decide between those two is economic feasibility, then I would suggest you could forward that recommendation onto the council, and they can require additional study as they see fit. All they're doing is taking your recommendation at this particular.
But then that will open up the whole can of worms, we can say, for every single thing, like transportation. We said the same thing, right? That we need further analysis, we cannot make any recommendation, period. So I think in order to make any constructive recommendation here, we need all the information we can get at this point. And I think it's irrespective of whether it's going to cost less or more. Otherwise, this is incomplete. The EIR is incomplete if you don't have all the information. That's my opinion. I don't know about the others, but I think in order to make a constructive analysis, we need all the facts up front of us.
So what I'm hearing you say is we come up with what we think is the best design based on, I imagine, what the city wants, what the developer wants, and what we understood from a sort of a umbrella of the financials, and then submit it to the council. Is that what you're saying?
Saying you'll be making a recommendation to the council, and the range of that recommendation, there's quite a wide range of options in front of you. You know, there's
Sure.
this issue of financial feasibility, and if that again is the driver between any given choice, and that's, then you relay that to the council. If, on the other hand, if you have an opinion that you just don't have enough information, period, to make an informed land use recommendation to the council, then you make that recommendation to the council that you feel you need information in regard to X, Y, and Z, and that the council can then decide whether, again, that is warranted or they feel comfortable moving ahead with the material and the information at hand. You're making a recommendation to the council in terms of
I think, John,
whatever the breadth of your opinion is on this matter.
John, you recall from the very beginning when this EIR process started, we were looking at asking for the fiscal analysis, and we waited till almost towards the end when we got information, and we still think it's not complete. So fiscal analysis is one of the very important part of this whole approval of this EIR and also the specific project. So now we are at the point where you are saying that let's keep this aside and make your recommendation to the council that fiscal analysis is not complete, and leave it up to the council. Then what will be our recommendation in terms of this project? We cannot we cannot recommend something in the absence of one critical element of the whole EIR also.
I guess as a body, that's your decision to make. If you have fiscal impact analysis in front of you, so if your feeling is that study is inadequate, I guess that's one set of facts that you will recommend to the council. You think it's inadequate because of X, Y, and Z, and what else needs to be done. That's one factor. The other factor, if you're saying that, what is the criteria upon, how that fiscal impact study drives your decision making, you would need to articulate that to the council. Because if you're saying that, well, the fiscal impact study said that Plan X had a net was net revenue positive to the city, but we don't believe that. That's one sort of conclusion. Are you saying, well, you would support that plan if it was net positive? I think you need to sort of articulate, sort of narrow down these sort of broad kind of concerns you have into some list of actionable recommendations. This idea that it's inadequate is interesting, but I think we all need to understand when you say that, and I'm getting less into the developer's feasibility issue because the city attorney can speak to how obligated the city is to ensure the developer's profit, and that's not what this whole exercise is about. It's if you're using a fiscal impact study, then you need to articulate why it's inadequate, what the deficiencies were, and how that is so critical to your decision-making process that you're incapable of rendering a land use recommendation based on the absence of those perceived deficiencies. I think that's perfectly reasonable for you to make those kind of conclusions, put them in the record, and let the council evaluate that.
It's the thing is the reason we are asking this again is this whole project is going to cost so much money, $1.1 billion just to get off the ground. And in order to make a constructive decision based on that, we need to have the rest of the information for the rest of the alternatives. And if you just look at the initial cost, $1.1 billion, that's really a lot of money for the developer to fork it out. And we are in a position that we have to make a decision, yes or no, based on that, as when we think that there are some elements of these studies are still missing.
But what about if we look at it a different way and say, based on all the information we've looked at, this would be a design that we feel Brisbane could live with, and then let the the council sort out the finances based on what we can see with the finances. We have inadequate information about the finances, but this is what we feel that Brisbane could live with, and this is something that we and the developer. I mean, we've listened to a lot of meetings from the public. We've listened to the developer, and we feel that this would be something that not only Brisbane could live with, but would be possibly could enhance other areas. Don't know that that's a bad thing for a planning commission to do. I think that is more of the role of the planning commission than.
But how are you going to come up with this that we can live with? That's the question.
Well, I think that's sort of, isn't that sort of, I mean, this is what I'm throwing out. I'm saying that in the end, what we've been hearing is what's been in the EIR that we've studied, but also what the people in who have come to the meetings have expressed. And based on that and our own discussions, then we have something that we can contribute to the project. And I feel that's kind of a responsibility of as the planning commission. But I don't know. I'm throwing that out as alternative to what you're saying.
Yeah, well, I don't know.
Based on what I'm hearing, let me put
Yeah.
this in kind of two different ways of making a recommendation. One would be to say that as a commission, we believe this is the appropriate land use for the community. Thinking general plan level, the same way the community went through, did a general plan, and you did not analyze in that general plan the fiscal feasibility of individual sites. So you would say, this is what we believe to be the appropriate land use in terms of, as you've already talked about, the land uses we feel comfortable with in various locations throughout the site. These are the amount of development we feel comfortable with in terms of what we've heard about all the different subjects we've heard. In relation to the fiscal, you would then say, and with that land use come two things. One is that before you adopt it, there should be a demonstration by the developer of the feasibility, if I'm reading what you're saying. But more importantly, I think for the city is the fiscal impact of your municipal income and your costs. So you would say, as a policy, at whatever level of development this ultimately is built at, we want demonstration that each increment of development will generate sufficient revenue to the city to pay for the cost of that increment. And you can lay that out as a basic standard that will be met by every increment of development, because then you don't have to study every possible combination of what might come in what order. You don't have to study every different level of development that might occur. You simply say, as a policy, this project shall pay for itself. And you define pay for itself as the developer picks up the capital costs, and the development itself, the uses pay for the services that they take from the city. And that's one way. The other way is to say, since we don't have these studies, we are not in a position to make a recommendation until it is demonstrated to us that this occurs. That would be the recommendation you would make to the city council. And ultimately, the council would then be in the position of deciding, okay, do we decide to have those studies done, then go back to the commission, or does the council simply decide, no, we believe there's enough information, we're going to go ahead and make a decision without those studies, in which case you basically passed on your opportunity to make a land use decision, a land use recommendation. Either way is appropriate in terms of what you believe to be the case, but there's two different ways of looking at it.
Okay. Back to your questions.
I'm only going to ask one more of them. I'm wondering about the idea of a flexible density. Imagine that we've set a certain density in a certain area, and then the current owner decides that they want to subdivide and sell it to another party. Then does the owner decide how to divide that density, or how does that process work?
I think that's where you move from general plan to specific plan, because remember, first we're going to deal at a general plan level, saying these are the basic rules that apply to the baylands. When you get to that point, basically what you're saying is, here's the rule, the general rules, and then it goes back to the applicant, and basically what you're telling the applicant is, bring us a specific plan that accomplishes these things we've said. If you have issues of, as we've set densities for individual areas, we want that specific plan to somehow identify how development intensity gets allocated within an area if it's developed by several merchant builders, because we don't want to be the battleground for individual merchant builders arguing over who's entitled to land to that intensity, which is a fair question. But that would come out in a specific plan as to how that's allocated. There's lots of different ways that different specific plans I've worked on and have seen allocate that between uses within an area. But your job would be to say that that needs to be part of the specific plan, instead of working it out now and really you're dealing just at that basic policy level. Then we'll get to the more specific, and you're basically telling the applicant, solve these problems, and then we'll review how they were solved, whether we agree or not. But you've given him direction in terms of land use, development intensity, character of use. You've talked about issues such as phasing. How do we tie the amount of development in each individual increment that comes with infrastructure, with amenities? How would we allocate uses within an area? Those are the kinds of questions that you send back to the developer. Give us a specific plan that does those things.
So this is not a specific plan then, the one we reviewed.
Okay? It is. Okay? Let's try and get past that one.
And also the factor is that the plan that you presented in the EIR is quite different than what we're reviewing right now.
Okay.
Totally different. and that was phase 1 and phase 2 and residential and all of that. That's completely changed now, and this plan is nowhere near what we have in EIR.
Let's take it from the start, from the first question. One is, I think the first one, there is a specific plan in front of you. The specific plan has been submitted. There is an application for a specific plan for the entirety of the Baylands, minus Recology, minus the machinery and equipment building, minus the tank farm. That is in front of you. You have said several times that what you want to see on the Baylands, that is not the plan that you wanted. There's a lot of issues that you want to solve. You have also said that you want to just work from the general to the specifics. So the idea here is working first at a concept plan, general plan level. You would decide what you want to see in terms of land use, development intensity, and basic structure of what a specific plan needs to do. When you get to that point, and you're actually really close to that, is you would then look at the specific plan that has been submitted by the applicant. You would determine whether that specific plan accomplishes, whether it's consistent with your land use vision, whether it accomplishes the things you want. If it does, then you can recommend its approval. If it doesn't, then you say, okay, UPC, bring us back a specific plan consistent with what we've said at that general plan, concept plan. But you've also talked about things that you want to see and issues that you have that go beyond what's in that specific plan. Because remember, going back to our first workshop, even though it's called a specific plan, there's a big range of how specific a specific plan can be under the law. And what we're hearing from you is there's certain issues you want a specific plan to address that the one in front of you may not.
I think part of it,
I'm totally confused now.
well, I think part of it is that this is a difficult format for us to really examine the information because, in some cases, like, for example, traffic, I feel like there are gaps in the information and maybe it's not possible to get any more information than what we have other than, building it and seeing what happens. But in other areas, I think there is information, like in the financial plan, that we could potentially go over. But, when we're up here, it's hard to break open our notes and start doing line item by line item. I feel like we can say yes or no, and that's about it. So I was wondering if at this phase we should make working groups or subcommittees to look at this information more in depth and then bring,
Also, with this
suggestions
plan
back.
here, the traffic study will be totally different.
Well,
But that was based on residential. and all of
Again,
that.
if we could clarify, what was presented tonight is an illustrative way as a tool for you to visualize intensity and density to further tonight's conversation. It's not a new plan. The numbers in there in terms of square footage all lie within the limits of what was studied in the EIR. There are no land uses that were not studied in the EIR. So there's nothing new in there that is not included or studied in the realm of the EIR. This is not a new plan that's been presented to you
No,
tonight.
the thing is the land use that you use in the study of the traffic analysis and all the others is totally different than here.
I would disagree. I would disagree with that statement.
Based on what? Because there is no residential element here.
If I
The
could,
traffic study.
if I could,
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, if I could.
Yes.
There's a CPP alternative that was studied in the EIR that had no residential.
Yeah,
No residential.
Right.
Zero residential. And that was studied in the EIR.
yeah, but the thing is, this is all totally different configuration here in terms of what you are proposing here. And I think the traffic study, if you do that, it will be different numbers, believe me.
And it will be different numbers. It will be lower than what you see in the CPP alternative.
I don't know about that, but unless you do that analysis.
Right. And here's, remember, the process we laid out, because one of the questions you asked at the very beginning of the process is, we have 4 scenarios the two developer-sponsored plan, the CPP scenario, the recology scenario, and the renewable energy alternative. And one of the questions you asked at the very beginning is, how do we meld them together? And you had talked about the outcome may be some kind of hybrid of
Right.
them.
Right. We did.
And as you laid out in your last meeting, April 28th, through, and all of the scenarios and alternative have the same building blocks. What you laid out was essentially a hybrid of the renewable energy alternative and industrial, the developer-sponsored plan in Area 4. The concept that is in front of you tonight, no matter how we lay this out, is a hybrid of the renewable energy alternative and pretty much the CPP scenario or the recology variant. The idea is that rather than say there's a gap in traffic study, whatever it is you want analyzed, go back and reanalyze every one of the scenarios, all the alternatives, then we'll make a decision between them. What we had hoped for and where we were leading is focus on what that hybrid looks like. Then you can say, now what we would like to, and our questions are, we have gaps in traffic. How would this function in terms of traffic? How does the air quality compare to what was there before? Because ultimately, if you come up with a land use scenario that's a hybrid, remember we talked about, we would need to come back with CEQA findings that lay out, these are the impacts of that hybrid compared to the EIR. So we're not headed any different than we've talked about from the very beginning. But what you have in front of you and what you described on the 28th and what this is just a hybrid of things you've already seen, which is a typical outcome of a large-scale specific plan or any general plan process. I have yet to see a large-scale specific plan get approved exactly as it was originally proposed. So that is the reason, remember, you had also asked, how does this EIR work if we come up with a hybrid? And we had said we come back with a series of findings taking, this is your recommendation, here is how it compares to those original analyses. And that's essentially where we are right now. If you feel that there are gaps or information that you need in order to make that recommendation, as I said, there's two ways. Either we make a land use recommendation and identify we need further study in terms of A, B, C, and D, or you just say we're not going to make a recommendation, go study A, B, C, and D before we make a recommendation. As stark as I can put it, those are kind of...
Or you can say that based on this plan, you come up with a new EIR.
Yeah, and that's a recommendation you can make.
Right.
That
That is-
there ought to be
We talked about that.
a recirculated EIR on this alternative, and then ultimately the council as lead agency would make their environmental determination. But that is, yeah, if you said this is our plan, this is our recommended land use, and we believe a new EIR should be done based on that plan, that would only be that as a project, that would be a recommendation that you could make.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think there's a lot of maybe fear or confusion in some ways of putting the details in front, and trying to inform our recommendation. And as we visualize, which this tool really helped us do with the land use, we start feeling more and more responsible or conscientious about that decision, right, that we're making. So when you look at it, because I looked at this last week and I was like, okay, low intensity, mid-range, does it fit? All the pieces are in there, right, what we recommend or what we want. But there's concerns about risk, health issues that we've discussed, and how does that fit into, I was trying to come up with two columns with the concerns, and then how does the intensity match or affect those things. And I think that's kind of what we've been talking about tonight, like, for instance, traffic, circulation. So I think stepping back, if you're just looking at these pieces, yeah, all the pieces that we want more or less are in there. What intensity, I had some opinions on that, but I think there's a bigger issue here in deciding how to move forward. You know, like, for instance, I was looking at smaller footprint for ecology, but I wanted higher intensity for, area 2. You know, I didn't want the low intensity for 2. I wanted in the higher intensity, you know, for that area. So there's like these slight different combinations of that, which we could figure out going through each one of these, but I think these other details are getting in the way, and so maybe
The other details.
the consequences or the issues that you brought up, the concerns that Lloyd went over about, feasibility and those sorts of things. You know, the cost of doing all of this, and which
Are
we
getting
need
in the
information, right, we need information about, okay, how many people, if we're doing this intensity, how many people does that expose to potential risk, or health issues? So those kind of things are hard to separate when you're just looking at it, and I think we don't want to feel committed to that.
Well,
So-
what do you think about addressing those issues with the working group or in some format other than
Yeah,
meeting?
I think that's a good suggestion. We also want to keep the process moving, so there's always the fear of that maybe delaying it unnecessarily. Maybe there's a different solution, but I like the idea of being able to discuss that, what the missing pieces are, maybe come back with our concerns to
So
staff
you're saying
to summarize.
as a group come back
Right.
after we think about it.
But I don't want to spend,
Couple of
6 months doing that. I think maybe to do it in what our concerns are and then summarize that, and maybe have staff help us summarize that so we can move to the next component. But I don't know how time, how does time allow for that in your mind, John?
Our next Baylands meeting is set for June,
Second Thursday in June.
is it the 9th?
So,
I believe that's June 9th is our next.
so the next meeting, we're going to be discussing something else.
Well, no, we need to be very clear as to what the purpose of this next meeting is.
26th, you mean?
Pardon? No,
May 26th.
no, May 26th.
3 weeks.
The next Baylands meeting of June 9th, I think we all want to have a very clear idea of, is it going to be the commission providing sort of questions to us that help somehow clarify where your direction needs to be, or are you going to provide those questions in advance to us and use the meeting as a forum to provide responses and have a dialogue about that? If the commission wants to entertain this sort of subcommittee idea or something, that's, your prerogative. Sometimes that's a little more flexible in terms of meetings, actually, in terms of.
I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the subcommittee is something we'd all feel good about, and then providing you with questions from that group ahead of time before the meeting, so we can at least cut some of the time down. I don't want to
So
spend
you're
an extra
just-
meeting just presenting everything.
So what you're
staff.
saying is this night, we should decide what subcommittee meetings we would have?
Right, if we would have that,
How do you
how we
vote?
can
Well,
have the,
I don't know. I'm
I
still,
think there's some real concerns that people are.
I'm still trying to figure out how to handle this
Right.
situation on the intensity.
Yeah, in the subcommittee meeting, I think it's really not to come up with the answer, but to come up with the concerns or the pieces that we feel we need clarification on to then present to staff. So does that sound right? Something like that? So,
I don't know. I'm really confused at this point between the plan that was submitted to us and what we are now and what kind of decisions we have to make now. So
well, that's what we can
I'm
discuss
just,
in
I
the meeting.
mean, at this point, I really, I need some time to digest.
Okay.
So I will say that I will not, no,
You would not want to be on a subcommittee?
no, I don't, because I don't have the clear idea how I'm going to proceed. As I mentioned, my opinion that this is totally different than what we are supposed to do. We were asked to do, I mean, when somebody submit the EIR to us and said, this is the EIR, you review it, you
Right.
tell us whether adequate or not. And
Right.
that EIR is totally different than what we're doing here.
So what would you like, or what would you like? happen?
I will be very reluctant to give the opinion on the intensity
Mm-hmm.
part of that, because that's something that going to affect tremendously, whether we say lower intensity or higher intensity. It's very difficult to figure that out. But as far as the other issues, I think there is nothing else that we can discuss. We already have, I already have all the answers how I'm going to go with this, And
You do?
yeah, I can. I'm ready to make a recommendation after all
Okay,
you
for
guys have the
discussion.
time to.
Okay.
But the intensity part, I will have a very difficult time because that, as you mentioned, there are a lot of risk factors involved as well as
Right. Well, that's what's
a
on
lot
the
of
table
things are
tonight.
involved. Yeah,
Right.
this table, I'm not here to say that 0.25 for the ecology is better than 1.4.
So, well, that's what the meeting, we would discuss
I mean
that issue.
Well,
That's
well, we won't discuss how big Recology is going to be. We can only discuss the intensity in that area, and then
Yes.
it's up to applicant whether they're going to sell the land to Recology or not.
Right.
because basically what we're telling in this chart here is that you can go ahead and build that many square feet of building, whatever is here. And that's very difficult for me to figure, say whether it's appropriate or not. Because there are so many factors involved here. It's just not just the one thing. And I think that should be decided later on.
Well, and Lloyd brought that up.
Once we do the conceptual plan that said these are the areas we're looking for, then they should come back with a more specific EIR. At that time, maybe we can attack these problems here, because a lot of information is still, they can provide better fiscal
Oh,
analysis.
yeah, I understand
Take
that.
all of that factors, and
lot of-
then we can say that whether we go for the lower intensity, medium, or higher.
Right.
But at this point, asking us to me, is premature.
Okay.
I'm not very comfortable telling them what to do here,
Okay.
unless you guys are. I don't know.
John, did you have?
Well, I think a couple of things. One is that, you have, as of the last meeting, you have sort of a concept plan with land use with no intensity. That's kind of where
Right.
you stand. And the idea of sort of studying that in an EIR or something is that you have this mix of land uses. An EIR has to have a number even to study. So the idea that somehow you could take this kind of bubble diagram without any kind of intensity and study it in a meaningful way really isn't
Doesn't work.
going to lead to I don't think, any more useful information for your decision. I understand the difficulty. I think a couple things. One is, general plans do this. They do establish density, intensity standards for broad swaths in the entire city. You all have this kind of, either you have a density or an intensity that's been established in the general plan. So, that sort of overarching control is something the city is obligated to provide under a general plan. And then what is planned for in the general plan broadly, again, as Lloyd's pointed out, then it's implemented typically through a specific plan that then again shows how that overall policy is translated into land use and into a land use program and plan. And you have that for the developer, as we've talked about. That doesn't seem to be suiting the community's needs. So you need to kind of set what we believe are the ground rules for whatever kind of plan ultimately comes out of this process. And to the extent you can provide that sort of broad level of direction in terms of intensity, that's going to be necessary for anyone to take it to that next step, whether it's 6 months from now or 18 months from now or 5 years from now or whenever. If we go forward with no sort of intensity guidance, it really makes for a very problematic process going
Well,
forward.
what about the general plan? Does it give it does give the intensity, right? We can, based on that, and start from there.
And I was going to use the word problem. I'll use the word problem. Here's the problem of the 1994 general plan in the way that it addresses the Baylands. The 1994 general plan identifies floor area ratios for specific portions of the site that are intended to be used as the maximum allowable for individual site-specific developments. And they're high, 2.4, 4.8, 2, I mean, numbers that if you built the maximum everywhere on the site, you're 2 to 3 times the size of even the developer-sponsored plan, the amount of building. The plan then says that the actual amount of building on the Baylands will be far less than those maximums because we've got policies throughout the general plan, traffic, and open space requirements and so on. The general plan itself never says what the maximum build-out of the Baylands is. And so what happened is then when the EIR was done on that general plan, the EIR had to say, we are now going to make an assumption as to what that general plan will actually yield. And what it said was it based it on traffic to maintain at what in 1994 was believed to be achieve level of service D.
Yeah.
Well, that's not the rules, that's not the reality today. But what it said was about 1 million square feet of high generation commercial retail or 4 million square feet of industrial. That is in the EIR, which is not a regulation, not enforceable. The only build-out numbers in your general plan are those really high FARs for individual sites. So one of the things we're suggesting to you in making a recommendation at the general plan level is put something in the general plan that says this is the development intensity, because if your recommendation is stick with just what's in the general plan right now, what would an applicant could come back, and I think at one point the applicant did argue this, fine, I'll use those FAR numbers that are sitting in the trade commercial, 4.8 FAR north of Visitation Creek, 2. Whatever they were, and that's not at all what you intended. So I think that's where the difficulty comes about.
Okay, let me ask you this question. If you have these 3 intensities here, lower intensity, mid-range, and higher. Now, what type of backup information we need to back this? Say, for example, we say you should have the lower intensity. We got to have some reasons to come why we're recommending that. And that's my difficulty here as to if I say mid-range and somebody's going to say, oh, how come you decided mid-range? Why not?
Right.
Absolutely, yeah. So let me run through some of the differences between them. And I'll do them by area because then you'll see some of the differences. What you see is the difference on the Recology industrial area. The lower intensity would be Recology stays as it is, does not expand, and you have some relatively low intensity, 1-story business park filling in between, or industrial park filling in between the Geneva extension and Recology. The 1,050,000 assumes the expansion of the Recology facility. So that's about a 500,000 square foot difference there. When you get into area 2, that is the renewable energy area. So what you see there is under the lower intensity, assuming that area 2 is a large solar field. And maybe what I can do is I'll show these areas as we go through them. I went right past. Okay, so Recology we talked about. Lower intensity alternative, it's Recology staying in its current configuration and filling in the gaps along Geneva. When you get into the renewable energy area 2, the difference is under the lower intensity, it would be a solar farm with no building area. The 1.3 million square foot figure would be what I showed as that option of a tech campus with 2- and 4-story buildings.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Okay.
That's
And then as we get into
really
that,
important.
and I can keep going, why don't I keep going through? You need one of the,
You know,
Okay.
what, I missed a whole part of a packet for some reason.
Yeah, it's not in
have
our
it.
packet.
I never, so that's why I'm not
Oh,
confused.
okay.
I have this.
All right. So Area 1, recology, we talked about the difference is the expansion versus filling in. In Area 2, which has the biggest differences, under that lower intensity, it is the solar farm, which is essentially the renewable energy alternative. It would be ground-mounted solar over the entire area. The mid-range intensity is that tech park that we had shown, basically 2- and 4-story buildings would yield about 1.3 million. So if that is a comfortable development type, you'd be at the mid-range. At the higher range, you could go to 4- to 6-story buildings. And that's the difference between the mid-range and the upper range.
But the one thing that's missing here is we also discuss about half the area,
Yeah,
certain portion of the area, so that will change this table also.
right. So you would have the option, let's say, in the mid-range of saying, I would feel comfortable, or we would feel comfortable as a commission, just with the upper third of that tech campus along Geneva, the balance being standard solar farm. If that is the way you wanted to go, then we would essentially take that 1.3 million divided by 3. So you have options even within these ranges. As we get to...
This is helping us.
Okay, good. And it helps me, it helps us as staff when we know what the questions are. So this is really good both ways. Area 3 is assumed in all of these intensity ranges is active recreation, or as we talked about, potentially a solar farm or some combination, but no building area there. When we get to Area 4, which is industrial way, in each of these intensity ranges, we have assumed the same amount of square footage that is there today, the 240,000. When we get to the roundhouse retail or roundhouse area, that was that area in and around the roundhouse, 1-story buildings, primary retail, small shops, and that is 184,000 square feet for each one. We're not suggesting load up or put higher intensity right in and around the roundhouse. When you get to Area 6, which is the transit-oriented areas, basically the area, I said I was going to keep following this, sorry. So industrial way, the roundhouse area stays the same. So when we talk about the transit-oriented areas, north of Geneva, west of the Caltrain, and then south of Geneva along Caltrain, east there, if you look at basically 3 to 5-story buildings north of Geneva, 2 to 3-story buildings south of Geneva, that's where we get to the total of those two at about 3.6 million square feet. If you add a floor or two to those, so basically go to 4 to 6 stories north of Geneva, 3 to 4 stories south of Geneva, you can get up to about 4.7 million square feet. So those are the differences in how this laid out. And what I did earlier when I ran through these was basically take you through the mid-range, assuming maybe correctly or not correctly, you weren't going to ask about the high range, but
the only difference here is number 6.
no, the two areas.
Rest of them are pretty much the same, other than recology.
Yeah, the two areas where there's differences in development intensity, where for discussion are really Area 2. The question there is, we start with with one of the primary purposes, or the only purpose, being renewable energy generation, and then, as per your discussion on April 28th, well, maybe some level of development would be appropriate. And so the question is, if some level of development would be appropriate, our suggestion would be to focus more on a tech campus, because that's the kind of user that would want to be there, or we think would want to be there. And would you feel comfortable with a portion, a third or 2/3, or all of that being used as campus, that kind of campus, and what kind of intensity? So that's the question for Area 2. The other ones are pretty much the same until you get to Area 6, which is in and around Geneva and the rail line. And if you looked at a configuration that has 3 to 5 stories north of Geneva, 2 to 3 south, you'd end up with 3.6 million square feet. If you felt comfortable with taller buildings in those areas and putting more development in proximity to the station, you could add 1 to 2 floors on those buildings and get up to about 4.7 million. So it's really areas 2 and 6 that where there's the real intensity options. Otherwise, you know, what we've done is basically taken your land use discussion that you had and put development intensity to them, to each of the land uses you had talked about on the 28th, and in some cases, we're giving you options on how intense a land use might be. Because you did talk about R&D, which we're taking to be similar to Genentech, which is an office, laboratory, maybe assembly kind of use. And it can be taller or less tall and give you more or less square footage.
Great.
Does
that feel more palatable?
Yeah, that's a little bit better.
Yeah.
At least I understand much better now. Thanks. So we can even come up with a hybrid of this, come up with a, like you mentioned, 1/3 at the, in the,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's the idea. This is not, and that's, hopefully I've been clear from the beginning. You do not have in front of you, you never had in front of you 4 scenarios and an alternative that you had to pick one and only one.
Right.
You have basically in terms of a land use plan laid out hybrid, and now even in terms of densities on individual areas, you can look at higher or lower. But I'm trying to give you a starting point and a understanding of what this many square feet means on an area of such and such size.
So, how do you feel?
Well, we'll
we
think
have
about
some-
this. I think we've got a little fairly better idea now, so maybe next
Great.
meeting we can discuss a little bit more on this.
So what kind of subcommittees were you thinking?
Well, that's my first question is, do subcommittees have to be specifically approved or formed during public meetings, or can we just do whatever we want as long as we don't create a serial meeting with more than
Right.
2 commissioners?
You should appoint a subcommittee this evening, and you would meet on an ad hoc basis. They wouldn't have to be advertised Brown Act meetings, but for everyone's sake, you need to define a subcommittee this evening, if that's your...
If we include members of the community, do they all have to be identified tonight?
Would we use,
I'm not sure.
would we, they
That's-
would have to be open?
Or can we invite
or-
people to
Sub-
observe and without making them formally part of the subcommittee?
The subcommittee would be planning, it's a subcommittee of the Planning Commission. That's what you'd be forming. If you want to invite members of the public, I'm not, I guess we could, I would probably suggest we just do it as an open meeting, because I don't want to be in a position where only certain people know about meetings. So
Right.
if that's your desire, then they could be advertised.
And how long do we have to notice that?
72 hours.
72
Right.
hours?
Hours.
Who wants
Did
to be
you
on a
want to
subcommittee meeting?
meet?
I do.
Would you like to meet? Are you still like to meet?
I would like to be on a
So who
subcommittee.
would
Okay.
you like to meet with? I was
Well,
wondering if you'd like to meet with me.
Who
or
who
would-
wants to be on a subcommittee?
I would like to work with you, if that's okay.
That is okay.
Yeah.
I will work with you also, okay?
Oh, okay. I thought you didn't want
wait,
to
wait.
be on a subcommittee or.
Okay, so you
So all
two
of
want to
us.
work on?
So all 4?
We can have all
We can't
four.
do that.
We could make 2 subcommittees.
Right.
We have- we'd have to
Subcommittee
have
is
two.
2.
Right, so we have to
We could have
do.
2 subcommittees
We
if they
can't-
really wanted to
we'd
be.
have-
Maybe
Right.
Carolyn will do, if you want to do
One
it, or...
subcommittee,
you
one
want me to do
subcommittee
it.
is enough.
Yeah, one's enough. Why complicate things?
One complicated, yeah.
Let's do that.
Do what?
You two. Subcommittee meeting.
You said you didn't want to be on a subcommittee.
Changed my mind.
Oh, I see.
are you saying you want?
I think it will be better for you and I mean for Mr. Anderson and Carolyn to be on the committee, because I don't want to impose too much of my opinion on the. I'd like to hear from you also.
So Commissioner Parker, Commissioner Anderson,
are thinking of having
Well,
a subcommittee.
yes.
Because I have a tendency to.
great. Can we declare that as good for the record? Okay.
Okay.
And we should
And is it
communicate with
possible-
staff and like maybe reserve the small room and figure out when we're going to do it.
And is it possible to get the results of the subcommittee before we meet?
I think that given the short amount of time, the results of the subcommittee are likely to be at the meeting, but
No, you can. What you can do is
or do we have to
can send us
notice our results 72 hours before the next meeting?
you can send us the email saying this was the results of.
Hang on.
We can't
No,
send you
no.
the email.
We
Let's-
can't, that would be a meeting, wouldn't it?
I mean, depending on when the subcommittee meets and whether or not we can package that up with the agenda packet for the June 9th meeting or not, we'll just have to decide. And if it can be done, that's great. We'll put it in a packet. If it can't be done because of the timing, then it'll just be reported orally at the next full meeting. That would be the normal course of events.
Okay, we will
So
try.
we have not heard from the public.
Great.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea because some people.
And the subcommittee meeting is to discuss questions that we want to bring before the council, is that correct? I mean, before the commission, or we don't?
I think the
just-
primary purpose is to go over the
City.
body of material we have before us and determine what we do and do not know
Okay.
about it
That
and
would work for me.
organize questions and conclusions.
Okay, great. So if we want to squeeze in public comment, I guess we can end our deliberations,
If
yes?
We can end for tonight, but if
Right.
anybody has.
Well, right, so now I can well, it's not officially opening, but, so let's just move into comments, public comment. So with the amount of time we have left, let's try to keep it less than 5 minutes each, please.
Do we need to extend the meeting?
Right now, we have 5 minutes.
How many
We
slips?
we have two, so if we keep to these, we have 3.
There's get more and more.
Well,
Yeah, 5, 6.
we'll just limit the time, so.
Let's just extend to 11 and beg people to not take all of the time
Right.
available.
Yes. So,
Everybody's
thank
waiting
you.
for
So we'll-
first so they can make public comments.
well, we're going to extend it to 11 o'clock if that's okay with everyone. And then, depending on how many slips I get, I'll just divide up that time. And unfortunately, we'll have to cut you off if you go over your time. You can come back. In order. There's one more. How many more slips? 1. So there's 5. Okay, good.
It's 25 minutes.
Right. So let's just do 5 minutes. Let's try to keep 5 minutes each, please. First, Barbara, come on down.
Okay, I'm gonna try to keep this to 5 minutes, but that would have me talking like the chipmunks, so not sure how this is gonna work. One of the things that we've discussed as a community and as part of the Open Space and Ecology Committee, although I'm not up here officially speaking for them, is the idea that the development would be energy positive. In part because a development like this has a massive amount of embodied energy in just the buildings, the infrastructure, all of that. So even if it's generating positive energy, it's still a long way from being energy positive in and of itself, because you start off with a massive energy debt. One concept. Another concept is, I don't know if Zola wants to throw up his thing again, but most commercial, now if you kind of take all the commercial in the world and you lump it all together and you average it out, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, and I used to have this data in it but I've been up since 4 this morning. So most commercial is too energy intense in its use to be able to provide its power solely on its rooftop. If you were talking about a FAR of 1, 1.5, 1. Something in there, maybe. But when you start talking about 5- and 6-story buildings, you're pretty much guaranteed that it's not going to be able to cover its own energy costs on its rooftop, especially if you start throwing in these other great things like green roofs. For example, those buildings on that energy campus up there, I'd say that parking lot structure was roughly 3 times the building. Well, if you've got a 4-story building, that's fine, but then you had this other 2-story building, which is only going to be able to cover maximum 50% of its energy. So this is why we need solar fields, because when you're talking about a commercial intense development, it's not going to be able to become energy neutral, let alone energy positive, without dedicated solar space. Not that you can't layer that with parking lots or other things. We should definitely do as much layering of purposes as possible. This is how you reach sustainability, by integrating processes and creating a full cycle of uses. Okay. Another concept I wanted to throw out there is I don't think you can talk about development intensity without talking about heights. One of the things that is really important to this community is our view shed. It's important to the windsurfers. So you don't want to get into this situation where you've got the FAR of 1 on a 16-story building because they've built out one corner of the lot and they've gone straight up, right? So it's really important to me personally, and you're going to do what you want because you're the committee, but when you talk about building intensity, you also talk about height limits, okay? Because otherwise they're just going to go up. Concept number 4, soils processing. I love that the soils processing, I love that it makes money for the UPC, and I love that it makes money for the city of Brisbane. I am pro-business. However, there are things that need to be addressed. UPC soil processing does not, to what I've heard, I'm not going to put this forward as fact, does not have a real great record with leachate management, methane management, dust management, or height limitations. So if that is what they want to do on the other side of the property, I think that that's fine, but these things have to be taken into consideration. Concept number 5, the rail yard. I remember at one point I'm pretty sure I remember at one point this committee saying they wanted the rail yard to continue to serve Sierra Lumber. I think Mr. Zola's plan is really great. I think it really has brought together a lot of things this community has said. But the rail yard was on one side of Caltrain and the lumber yard was on the other. So that is just one small disconnect. The main reason I came down here tonight was because after listening to you last time, trying to make decisions in the abstract about land uses, I was ready to pull my own hair out. And I'm like, I'm a visual person. I need to be able to look at these things in a format which I can kind of flip back and forth and understand conceptually, well, I've got this here, that there, instead of just kind of saying to yourself in an abstract way, well, would I like $1 million? Why, sure, that sounds great. Yes, no, maybe, okay. So I actually killed myself putting these things together for you guys. And they're in recycled folders, so they're all catty. Please forgive me.
Thank you.
Okay. And what this is kind of a rough representation of some pre-existing conditions. This doesn't tell you where you're going to put your open space. That's up to you as a commission or the city council. It's not me. I might make recommendations to the open space and ecology, but that's not in here. The first page is sources of sound pollution. So you got 101, you've got Caltrain, and you've got the Caltrain station. Page 2 is man-made features, the Roundhouse, Martin Substation, Kinder Morgan, Recology, Industrial Way, Firehouse and Machine Company, the Tank and Boiler Shop. And these are all done on transparency, so you can flip them back and forth. You can write on them with Sharpie. You can add additional pages, but it allows you to look at everything. And this is certainly not everything. Like I said, I didn't put anything down for open space, and we have our general plan that requires 25% open space. But this is kind of the pre-existing fixtures of the site. And then traffic and housing, that just kind of went messy everywhere. And some of it I wasn't sure what to do because we've got trucks coming out of the industrial park. We've got Recology, which is a huge source of trucks. We've got the Hunters Point development. We've got Executive Park, India Basin, Sierra Point build out, which is not complete and seems like maybe it's starting to move again. Visitation Valley and over 10,000 new units and 30,000 new residents. But these are just some of the sources of those things going on and kind of where they are on the map. And of course, their areas of influence go way beyond what is on the map. Next, I put reduced building height areas as requested by the windsurfers and the Brisbane Viewshed. Important habitat areas, we've got Icehouse Hills, San Bruno Mountain, PG&E wetlands, and the Bayside. And the lagoon side actually in there too. You know, because we've got the setback for the waterways, blah, blah, blah. I can't remember right now. Sources of air pollution, there's dust from the soils recycling, the sanitary pump station, which may or may not move, I don't know. Recologies, potentially an odor source, Kinder Morgan farm, and of course the landfill methane, which is still oozing out occasionally. Flood zones, this one is really, really subjective. It depends so much on how many meters of sea level rise we get, how much the topography on the baylands is raised, how far out in the future we're talking. So I just put some marks on here. You can use whatever, sea level rise measurement you want and amend that however you want. It's there for you to organize your thoughts. And of course the waterways. And then I had to put the last pages on paper as kind of the base. It's known hazards, the PG&E gas main. I know where it goes up until a little bit past Guadalupe Canyon Parkway. I'm not sure if it continues to go up Bay Shore or not.
Excuse me, Barbara.
Yeah.
Can you wrap it up in about a minute? Please?
Trying. This is my last page. I'm talking really fast.
Thanks.
Of course, the Kinder Morgan Tank Farm, the landfill site, the Schlegg Lock site, the Kinder Morgan, I think it goes straight out into the bay, but that's not real precise. Like I said, I had some of this information. Some of it I had to do from memory. You should, of course, make it your own document, but thank you very much.
Thank you for all that work.
Yeah.
Anya, please come down.
Yes, Anja Miller, just listening to all of this, I found it very cute, kind of, that the solar farm concept that has been so well received by you people and understood all the impacts, the environmental benefits and other benefits, is now being proposed to be a hybrid with a campus. And the reason for the campus being there instead of, for instance, in Area 6, where it could be, is given that the campuses want a view of the water. Well, we have a beautiful campus design and went through a lot of research and work by your commission on Sierra Point with the water view. And is there a campus there? It's been, 10, 15 years, and no campus has come there. So this is all talk and theory to get you off focusing on what we really need. So I say, if you want a campus, it could be in Area 6. Then the timing of the high-speed rail, we can't do anything because it's not going to be decided. Well, they have an EIA next year. And when is the Geneva extension going to be the result? It's totally up in the air. There is no financing available for that. It is a total, and that may take another, San Francisco is studying different ways to make that bus go. They move maybe Caltrain station. There are lots and lots of troubles still in a way before we can say, oh, this is a Geneva extension. You may very well have to consider an alternative, a hybrid of a surface Geneva, surface to the station, and forget that overpass, the expensive. You have to consider these realities. And by the time they have Geneva solved, maybe the high-speed rail will be solved. So you have to put things at the same level of perspective, not be focusing on one as a fact. As far as the total development allowed by the general plan, the 94 general plan does indeed have the traffic limitation on total building. And that was part of it, was an appendix, I believe, in the general plan or the EIR or whatever, but it is part of the general plan, and that it has to do with the level of service at our Brisbane intersections. And if they go to D, you can't build on the Baylands. That is that, and in order to keep within that level D level of service, the maximum build out on the Bayland would be between 1 and 4 million square feet. And here you have Section 6 only proposed to be 3 to 4 million square feet in one area. I mean, you just can't believe we can't move out of here if you allow the traffic from that kind of intensity to come. You have to consider the traffic impact as the absolute, and of course you have all the cumulative that has been referred to here. How much traffic are we going to get from Slayslock and Candlestick, those developments, before anything is built on the Baylands? So that's why the Credible plan was designed to be within the current general plan, and limiting the development to 1 or 2 or whatever million square feet that would still be within the general plan and have positive, energy positive. So that really, you have to remember that. The traffic generation for us people living in Brisbane now and for our children and grandchildren, you have to consider that in any intensity determination. The last thing I want to say is that I really have a problem, like Barbara did, with the two-dimensional depictions you have of this and that. I've been personally at Arizona State University in Phoenix, where they have an absolutely wonderful planning lab that is being used by the city of Phoenix and other Arizona places, where you have three-dimensional. It's practically a round-the-room screen, and you can have all the plans and sections and height variations. You can just play with them right there, and you can actually see in 3 dimensions what things would look like. And you just need, I hope that one of your recommendations is, before you go any further, is to ask the council to send it to Phoenix to study your plan in that lab. Or find another place nearby if there is another one. I don't know. But if there is, you should absolutely have a 3-dimensional chance to play with the alternatives in a much more rational way. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Anya. Leora, did I pronounce that well? Okay, thanks.
Hi, I'm Leora Tanawatko, and I've been in front of you guys before to talk about housing, and what has happened between last time I talked to you and now is that I got a phone call from my mom, who's a Brisbane resident, and she was like, I've heard you done some work around affordable housing, and I'm having trouble affording my house in Brisbane right now. So can you put me on the top of the list? And I was like, Mom, that's not exactly the kind of work that I do. Could you just hang in there for like 20 more years? And, that's a tough answer to give. But I know that deciding the land uses of this is a very large job, but it's also like incredibly critical that we include housing in it, not just for people like me, but also my children and my grandchildren. And, I've done a lot of research on the cycles, the real estate cycles, particularly in the Bay Area. And if we just don't build housing, just use this piece of land for other uses, it's not going to get any better. Like our economic cycles will, boom and bust, but the housing costs just keep rising. And, we really need to make sure that we do everything that we can so that we can sort of stem that cost. I also understand that you guys are interested in having this be a very sustainable, very energy efficient and productive site. But I would urge you to look at the feasibility of the solar fields and make sure that they can produce. I had read somewhere that the cloudiness in the climate was something that would be an issue for solar fields, and also look at the impacts on the environment from so many people driving into the Bay Area from other places because they live, in the valley or in Vallejo or something. And if you think about if you were to build, say, a few thousand units on this site, how many cars you could take off the road and how you could alleviate congestion because they could take the Caltrain or they could, work substantially closer to where they live. So I know that there's a lot of stuff to think about, but I hope you consider those things. Thank you so much.
Thank you. David?
Chair and members of the committee, my name is David Crabb. I am not a resident of Brisbane. I will be straight out on that. I am a resident of the peninsula, however, and I do see this project as part of a regional world view, and including San Francisco Peninsula and Santa Clara County. The thing I'm seeing, a couple of issues I'm seeing with this project is, number one, you're calling it a world-class model of sustainability, and yet it's really primarily designed for automobiles. And that's backed up by the fact that the number of parking garages you saw in the illustrations they gave you. A whole sea of parking garages with solar panels on top. A campus with parking garages in the middle. This is the old way of thinking. We designed this way in the 1950s in terms of setting individual zoning here, zoning there, so that people had to drive from here to there to get to work, or get to even from one project to another project where there might be a place where they could have lunch. So that should be looked at. I back up the prior speakers, Leonora's comments about the housing. What you are doing with this project, since you have eliminated the housing from the original proposal, is that you are basically saying that we're going to build a project create thousands of jobs, provide absolutely no housing, and we're going to push that responsibility onto the adjacent cities. I don't consider that responsible as a regional planning decision, as much as I recognize the issues specific to Brisbane in terms of the population of Brisbane, the population that may come in, the balance thereof. I've always thought that it made sense to try to put the section of this project, this site that is near San Francisco, propose to San Francisco that they might want to annex that piece of property to build housing on it. And then you could have the balance of the property to build revenue-generating developments for you, and you wouldn't have the responsibility of carrying the housing, all the unbalance between the new housing residents and the old housing residents. That seems to be a good possibility there. So anyway, I do applaud the energy positive approach. I applaud the open space. I think that the solar farm can be very creative. It doesn't have to be in one place. It can be in lots of different places. It could be a huge space frame that went across 2/3 of the project. There are all kinds of fantastic ideas, but I'm not seeing anything exciting in this project in terms of an exciting idea or a place I'd want to come to. Lastly, I'd like to see you draw a circle around the Caltrain station and the main bus stops with a 1/4 mile and a 1/2 mile radius, and then tell me what part of this project is available by foot and by transit, because we're talking about transit-oriented. I don't think it's anywhere near transit-oriented as you think it is. So thank you.
Thank you. Willie.
My name is Willie. I'm new neighbors. I just moved 2 weeks ago.
All right, welcome.
And this was my first meeting. I was very impressed by the two gentlemen out there for the lack of reference point. I don't know what I'm doing. I need more data. That shows me that you guys are really looking deep into it, right? I'm all for the developer as well, but we need to really fine-tune that intensity. You can have intensity, but where do you put the intensity and on which road that you can allow for that intensity, right? You need to balance, have a sweet spot. For example, there could be areas where the neighbors are going home, Brisbane neighbors, there may be certain roads. You don't want to put an intense property density in that area. Simple things like that. We should have a big development here because it's going to solve many things, but with a good balance of housing and commercial. Again, a sweet spot. Everything is about balance to scale. And then the whole night they talked about the structure and all what can be done, but they never talk about a school, right? When you're going to have a flourishing environment, you need to have good school, because these people who work in a commercial building will buy a house here, and you need to have those school fundamentals of life here. And one thing I want to add was there was not a ratio of building to parking, and then from parking to the outside of a road. That road going to accommodate that kind of 4-story building? That ratio you need to speak of. So you need to really think through in every road that you're going to allow for that intensity. And I'm all for that. And then one final point is the traffic noise, right? You guys live in a mountain and you hear the noise. How do we minimize that? Maybe on a highway you can have a, whatever you call it, to block some noise, and it'll be good for Brisbane as well. Again, the most important thing before you come to the next meeting, I want to see you guys build a criteria, strict criteria for yourself. You don't need to ask them. Meaning have a good criteria. What are the, for example, I just told you that, yeah, there could be views, could be one of the criteria. The intensity could be one of the criteria in ratio to parking to the kind of roads. There's a few fundamentals. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome to Brisbane. I hope you'll really enjoy it.
Yeah.
And we're a community of volunteers, so feel free. Oh, thank you.
All right, that's all of our public comment. Thank you for contributing, everybody.
I had a question for Lloyd. Is there a possibility of, you develop a pretty good 3-dimensional program on the SketchUp? And nowadays there are a lot of things coming up with the virtual reality. The Oculus is one of them that just came up with a very good model. So is it possible for you to see if something like that can be done, which will give a much better idea of better than the 3-dimensional view actually?
Yeah, I don't know if the SketchUp is adaptable to that. It would be easy to find out. And Anya Miller had talked about the program running at ASU. I think ABAG had also demonstrated that software at a planning conference, about a couple years ago. The company who runs that, what they're both running is a beta version of that, and we had checked on commercial availability. The software is now owned by the people who do, I can't remember which, not ArcView. No. It's owned by a larger company that does computer drawing software, and they are I couldn't get a commitment on when it would be commercially available. The best that they said is maybe fourth quarter this year, maybe next year, but they wanted to beta test much more until it becomes commercially available. So,
But they do have the virtual reality for those real estate agents there. They have the smaller type of program that they can show you the entire house plan.
well, I can show, yeah, it's easy to do an entire house plan.
Yeah, but the
It's-
entire site is a different story.
Trying to do 700 acres so you can
Yeah,
tour
it's a
around all
different
the
story,
streets.
but-
Yeah. So that's what we use SketchUp and trying to lay that out because it is a fairly common program. We can, focus in on things as opposed to essentially setting up would be more similar to,
AutoCAD has that too, right?
AutoCAD is the one I was thinking. AutoCAD is the one who actually purchased the program
Autodesk.
running at
Yeah.
ASU. They will not have it available until late this year at best. But trying to do it virtual reality so you can go through, there's just so many possibilities. It's like creating a computer game to be able to do that much with it.
No, I saw some of that and they're really fascinating.
Yeah,
Really.
yeah. I'll check in to see what the ability to adapt it is, but it was just creating the model we had, and we did it in all of subsequent to your April 28th meeting. It was, 4 people working an entire week and then 2 people the rest of the time up through yesterday late afternoon. So it's a very labor-intensive thing, just getting as much as we did. But I can check on that.
It's very
You use the free program too.
So we-
SketchUp.
I guess we'll tuck that under items initiated by commissioners. Do I need to close public comment?
yeah.
No, okay, I didn't think so. Items initiated by staff.
I don't have anything this evening.
Okay. Any other items by the commission?
Nothing.
No? Okay, great. So can we have a motion to adjourn to our regular meeting on May 26th, right?
I motion to adjourn to the next regular meeting of May 26, 2016, 7:30 p.m.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Thank you, everybody.